Hello class, this is Professor Quigley and it is week 7 and I want to do something different. I am still going to make the challenge activity videos to help you get through those last tough challenge activities. I will still post those here in a little bit, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a video and I actually want to develop a real application using a real coding applications such as Microsoft Visual Studio to actually show you how the concepts that we're learning can be applied to real application development. What I do not want you to do is I don't want you to get hung up on the syntax, so I'm actually going to write this application in C#. This is not going to be how you write code in zyBooks. We will have those videos. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you what you could expect to see in a future class, or even in the real world, where you actually declare a loop, make assignments, do an if statement, do a while loop, and most importantly, I want you to understand functions, because I know we're talking about functions this week in the discussion threads, but it's kind of hard to understand what a function is by itself and what does it mean to modulize your code and to kind of segregate stuff into its own little section. That's difficult to understand unless you actually see a real example. So what I want you to do is I want you to follow along. I don't want you to code along with me because you really can't do that. But I want you to follow along and I want you to watch what I'm doing, listen to some of the things I'm saying. So I'm going to try to use the same terminology that we have been learning through weeks 1 through 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build an application that basically will greet you, and then it's going to be able to calculate the square footage of a room. And what we'll do is we'll do this by creating a function that'll take the length times the width and output what that area is for the user. So it should be something really easy for us to understand. We're going to ask them for some information. We're going to say, hey, what's the length? What's the width? We're going to do that calculation for them. So for starters, we know we're going to need some variables here. So I'm going to do, actually, before I start declaring variables, let me show you a little bit about what type of application we're going to build. We are going to build a console application. So what a console application means, it's an application that can run on the desktop. It's got a little output window. This is pretty much where everybody starts when they learn how to use programming. They don't just jump straight into web development or native desktop applications. So the first thing I'm going to do, console.writeLine, and I'm going to do hello world. Now, there's some special syntax that you see here when you do this in C#. However, this equates in zyBooks. In zyBooks, you do output, or you say put this string to output. This is how you do it in C#. You say console.writeLine, and then you put that string in there. So if we were in zyBooks, this would be put to output. Actually, it would be hello world to output. That's how you do that in zyBooks, but we're not going to do that because this is C#. Hence why it's giving me all of those red lines. But I'm going to go ahead and run this application. So if you notice, this application, it actually starts on line 7 here. So console writeLine, the only thing it should do is output to the screen hello world. So I'm going to go ahead and run this application here. It is going to open up that console window, and the only thing it should do is say hello world. The first time it does it, it is a little slow, but here it comes. It's a lot slow. All right, come on. It's thinking. Here we go, boom. Sorry about that. All right, so here's our little, kind of like a little command prompt window. There we go. So sorry about that. When it'll go quicker the second time. But you can see right here in the top, it says hello world, and then on the bottom it just says, hey, the program completed successfully. So all it said was hello world. And to prove that that actually changes, now I'm going to do console.writeLine, and then in parentheses, I'm going to put my name is David. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this application. Should be a little quicker. It is. And now you'll notice that as it spins up here, it'll say hello world, and then on another line it says my name is David. So everything like you've seen so far in zyBooks where you hit put to output, that's exactly what I'm doing here. So that's just an example of what I mean by don't get hung up on the syntax. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to declare a variable. So I'm going to do string name equals, and to start it's just going to be an empty string there. Then over here I'm going to do console.writeLine. What? We'll make it nice. We'll say hello. What is your name? Question mark. Not question mark. Semicolon. That's how C# does. Then what we're going to do, since I declared a string, that's the data type that we've learned, how every variable has a data type. Name, this variable is going to be called name. That's how we'll refer to it, and we're starting it off by setting it to where it's just an empty string. So in order for me to read a value from the user in C#, I'm going to do name equals, and in zyBooks we were doing name equals get next input. So what I'm going to do here differently in C# is I need to read it actually from the screen. So I'm going to do name equals console.readLine, like that. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say console.writeLine. I'm going to say hello. Same thing like in zyBooks where you do this backspace and N to do a new line. I'm going to say hello space plus, then I'm going to reference that variable name. So now when this application runs, I'm expecting it to declare a variable of name, console write hello, what is your name? And then after that user types it in, name is going to equal whatever they typed in on the screen. And then I'm going to write, or if I'm using zyBooks terms, this would be put to output hello and the name. So I'm going to go ahead and run this to see if it does exactly what we've expected so far. So it says, hello, what is your name? Now the program is actually paused. So if you remember before when I would just play it, it would just output to the screen and then it would say the program has stopped. So notice we don't have those extra lines here at the bottom. And also notice in the background, I could see some specs about the application we've built. I can see how much megabytes in memory is it using, how much CPU is it using. So it says, what is your name? So I'm going to put David. And now you notice my application said, hello, David. So there's a real live application that we just built together where we utilized a variable there. All right, so I'm going to stop that application. And let's keep going. So I'm going to ask you, or I'm going to ask now, console.writeLine. We're going to ask a new question of the user. I'm going to say, what is the length of the room? Now, same thing like before, I'm going to do, I didn't declare length, so I have to come over here because I need a spot in memory to hold that variable. So I'm going to say, this one's going to be an int. So in zyBooks you write integer, but in C# all you have to do is write int. So I'm going to say int lengt length equals, and we'll just start it off at 0. Start off at 0. So same thing like we learned in zyBooks, where how if it was a string it would have to be in quotes, but if it was an integer it didn't. That applies. So don't get hung up on thinking that you're learning zyBooks and it doesn't apply. It really does apply. So now that I have an integer declared, now I can use it in my code. So now I could say length equals, and this is going to be console.readLine again. However, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this. The reason why I have a red underline here, which is another thing that's really cool about Visual Studio, is that you're getting this real-time error message. And so rather than zyBooks where at the very end it's just kind of like, you made a mistake, I can actually see my errors as I type. So what I have to do here is a convert dot to int. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the user typed into the keyboard, they typed in a string. So they're physically typing in a number, or they're physically typing in the word on a keyboard, and I'm having to convert that to an int value. So that's all that's happening there. So now that I got the length, I need to get the width. And I'm going to do that new line thing here, so /n. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this, because remember what I told you guys, the lazy programmers are the best programmers. So I'm going to copy, come down here and hit paste. So now I'm going to console write line, what is the width of the room? So rather than length, I don't want to set length again and kind of overwrite what was happening there. This one is going to be the width. So now you notice what's nice about Visual Studio is width, I have a red line under here, and that's basically, if I were to mouse over that, it says the name width does not exist in the current context. So that means I have to declare it. So I'm going to say int width, I'm going to give it a starting value of 0. Now you notice my red line goes away because Visual Studio was smart enough to tell me that, like, hey, I got no errors, and I haven't even attempted to run the application yet. So let's go ahead and run this application. But before we do, for the sake of time, I am going to drop what us developers call a breakpoint on line 9. What this means is that when I go ahead and run this application, I could step through. So in zyBooks, we can do this. If you notice in your participation activities, you can hit next, or I think it's called step, and you just step and you go next, 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 to next. That is actually how we do it in the real world when we're having problems and we can't figure out what's going to happen. So I'm going to do that with you. So I'm going to go ahead and start this application. Here we go. Now, it's going to attempt to load the application here, but it's going to jump right to this line here. So what's happening is I can now step through every line of code. So there's a keyboard shortcut where I'm just going to hit F11, but it's this little button over here. So when I hit F11, it's the same thing that you see in zyBooks, where it advances to the next line. And the reason why I'm showing you this in this video is not to teach you Visual Studio. It's not to teach you C#. It's the fact that I want you to understand how the computer thinks. And so one of the best ways for me to articulate and really understand how a computer thinks is just to actually write an application and do exactly like you do in zyBooks. Just step and go next, next, next. Every line that it goes to is what the computer is going to execute next. So I'm going to hit F11. So every time it does this, it's going over line 9, 10, and 11, and it's reserving that spot in memory for those variables. Now I'm going to hit F11 to execute this line here, 13, and when I do that, it's going to pop up the window, and it's going to say, hey, what is your name? And so the whole application is not going to continue because it's waiting on me to do something. So I'm going to say my name is David. I probably should put a space there, kind of my OCD kicking in. So I type in David. Now my computer goes back over here and continues after setting that variable. You see how if I mouse over name, Visual Studio will actually show me that name equals the value of David, what I typed in. That is very helpful in the real world when you want to see your application working. Also down here in Visual Studio, you see all my variables I have declared. And so I can see right now for length and width, if you look at the value equals 0. However, I do have a value for name, which is David. So pay attention to that as we keep going. So I'm going to hit F11, and now it's going to console, it's going to ask the question, what is the length of the room? So here it is up on the screen. What is the length of the room? I'm going to type in 10 and hit enter. Now if you notice down here, I actually have a value held in memory, so length equals 10, but I still don't have a value for width, and that's because the computer hasn't got to that line of code that you've written yet. So I'm going to hit F11, and now it's going to ask me what is the width of the room. I'm going to say 12, and I click enter, and it's right here. So I'm going to go ahead and continue through the application, and that's pretty much it. It's done because we don't do anything with it after that. But we need to. So what I want to do now is I want to be able to create a function that is going to calculate that area. So let's go ahead and declare a variable. So I'm going to go, let me get rid of this breakpoint here, double click that. So I'm going to declare an int, actually, we'll keep it an int. And then we'll do double. We'll call this area equals 0. So double is kind of like a float from what you're using in zyBooks, kind of the same thing. So now what I want to do is I want to create a function. So normally I could say area equals length times width. And then I could do like we were doing in zyBooks, where I can just put the area to output. So I can have a statement here where it says area equals length times width, and then I could do console.writeLine, where if you're in zyBooks, it's put to output. And so I'm going to say the area of the room is space, do plus, this would be area. If I were to run this, and I won't do this with a breakpoint so we can go faster, because I know this video is going to get pretty long here, but consider this your 4-hour on-site lecture. I know everybody wants these quick videos that are short and to the point, but like sometimes this stuff just takes time to explain. So it says, hello, what is your name? I'm going to say David. It says, hello, David, what is the length of the room? I'm going to say 10. What is the width of the room? And I'm going to say 12. And notice here it outputs on the screen the area of the room is 120. That is great, but what happens if I don't want the program to end? What happens if I don't want the program to end and I want the user to be able to have the option to do this again? This is where we want to do a function, because like I said in our discussion post, we don't necessarily know how many times the user is going to want to calculate the area when we put something like that in a loop. So I'm going to exit out of this. And what I want to do now is create our first function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, and don't worry about the syntax. Once I write it, then I will show you what it means. Int calculate area is going to be int length, comma, int width. Okay. Now, you will recognize in zyBooks that you have what's kind of like this little section of your code that's happened, and then you declare like another section that's going to happen. And so what I've done here is I've created a function. And so if you notice here from lines 9 through 26, this is all that application code that was going to run. But I'm going to create another bit of code here that I can call, and it'll run anytime I want it to. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm declaring calculate area. That's going to be that function name. And then over here, I'm declaring what data type it is that it's going to return back. So it's going to be an int. And then over here is what I think some of you are getting hung up on this week. In the parentheses is where I declare what needs to be passed into this function in order for it to work. It's giving me a red line here. If I mouse over it, it says that it's not going to return a value. So I'm going to say we're going to declare int result. We're going to have that one start off equal and 0. And then what I want to do is I want to take the length. We're going to say result equals length times width. And then I want to return the result. Okay. I'll get rid of some of these extra line spaces. No, I'll keep them. Okay. So you notice here I now have a function. I have a function called calculate area. In order to calculate the area, you have to know what the length and width is. So if somebody was to say, hey, can you calculate the area of this room for me? You would say, sure, I can, but you'd need to give me the length and the width. So that's exactly what our function is doing here. It's saying that in order for you to call calculate area, I'm going to need to know what the length and the width is. So rather than having this over here where I say area equals length times width, I can now say area equals, and I'm going to call the function calculate, make sure I spell it wrong, C-A-L, right there. So now my IntelliSense is helping me out. So calculate area. And now in here, I'm not sure if you're able to see this, you might have to go full screen with this video if you're on your phone, I'm sorry, but this is basically telling me in order to use calculate area, I need to pass in a length and a width, and it better be an integer, otherwise it's not going to know what to do with it. So I'm going to pass in length, comma, width. And so we call this call in a function. So basically what it means is now every time anywhere in my code, no matter when, that I need to have the computer calculate the area for me, I can do it. All I have to do is say the area equals and pass in a function. And I just have to pass in the things that it needs to compute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint here on line 25. So I'm going to run the application, but then what I'm going to want it to do is stop. Actually, you know what? Let's stop a little beforehand so you can kind of get the flow of it. So let's stop here on line 19. And then what we'll do is we'll step through each line of the code so you can see how the program thinks. And I want you to see how it's actually going to jump from this line over here into this function, and then it's going to return back to where it left off. So I'm going to go ahead and click Run. And as this loads up here, it should start off right with the hello, what is your name? Sorry, my computer's running a little slow. Okay, so hello, what is your name? I'm going to say Professor Quigley, Professor Quigley, Professor Quigley. Hit enter. Now, it ran until I got to here. So if I mouse over name, I could see here that Professor Quigley was what I typed in, and that's what was actually stored in name. Also, if I look down here at my variables, I can see in memory right now, I have a value for name, that's Professor Quigley, but I don't have anything passed in for length, width, and area yet, and that's simply because the program hasn't executed those statements yet, or those lines of code. So I'm going to hit F11, and it's going to go back now to the part where it says what is the length of the room. I'm going to say it is 10. I'm going to hit F11, and now it's going to go back to asking me what is the width of the room. I'm going to say this is 12. Now, here, if I mouse over width, width now equals 12, length equals 12. Now pay attention to what's going to happen here, because this is really the whole reason why I'm making this video for you this week. Area equals, and it's going to call this function. So what I'm expecting to happen is when I hit F11, it jumped over to here. So rather than like everything you've learned up until this point in zyBooks, your code is executing line 13, 14, 15, and it's just going right till it hits the very bottom. Now it jumped. It jumped to our function where it said, okay, hey, area now equals whatever happens in this code here. So if I mouse over the length, we passed into the function the value of 10. So over here, when you call it, when you inside the parentheses, you put the values that you want to pass in. Then over here, you put in the values that you want to receive. So now that I'm inside the function, I passed in length equals 10, width equals 12. And so these are going to execute here. So the result now equals 0. But now, after I executed line 35, now the result now equals 120. And now what every function does, and this is in zyBooks, this is in Python, Angular, doesn't matter what language it is, every function you can have a return type where it's going to return, what is it going to return? I'm telling it to return the variable result, which equals 120. So when I hit F11 and I go down, it jumps right back to where it was, where it left off. So now if I mouse over area, it set area to equal 120, which is the result of that function, which is what we return back. So now when it does the console.writeLine, and I continue that here, it'll actually show on the screen exactly what we expected. And actually, I have to tell it to stop so we can see that value. So that was cool, but let me show you where this actually really pays off. Let's do a while loop. Let's imagine for a second here that we actually want to let the user calculate the area multiple times. So what I'm going to do here, and I actually probably should have commented this here a little bit, and I'll do that. So right here, I'm going to make a comment, kind of just like how you do in zyBooks. This is where we declare variables. Who knows if I spelled that right. Here is where we greet user. Put that back. Here is where we're gonna get length. Here is where we get width. And here is where we do calculation. And over here is where we're going to output result. Okay, I did that so it'd be a little easier on your eyes here. What's also cool about Visual Studio here is it says, I can mouse over where it says one reference, and it'll actually show me where exactly in the code. It tells me right here, line 29, and if I go back up line 29, this line of code is referenced, and that's real useful if you have like 1,000 lines of code and thousands of functions everywhere, and you want to change one and you're not sure where it's being used. But let's declare a variable called string keep going. We'll set it to a default value of yes. A little syntax there, or a semicolon there. Now what I want to do is before, like right after I greet the user, I want to put a loop right before we get the length. And I'm going to do while, so you guys remember our while loop. So I'm going to say while keep going equals yes. I'm really hoping that this is starting to spark some memories from some previous discussions we've had over the last couple of weeks. So here's my while loop. In my condition, it's going to be while keep going is equal to yes. I want it to do all of this stuff. So I'm going to cut this, paste this in here. So at the very end, after we output the result, we're going to ask the user, we're going to say continue. So basically our code is going to say console.writeLine, and we're going to say, do you want to calculate another room? And I'll do question mark. Okay. So I'm going to ask the user, do you want to calculate another room? We'll say, please type yes or no. Okay, period. Now, what I'm going to do here is if you remember our while loop from what we talked about, it has a value of yes. So we started it off here on line 14 where we said keep going is going to equal yes at first. That's going to guarantee that this while loop is going to execute at least once, because when we first get to line 21, it started off as yes, so it's just going to go right into it. But at the very end, we're going to ask, do you want to calculate another room? Type yes or no. So I'm going to say the new value for keep going is going to equal console.readline. And we'll go from there. So let's run this. So I'm not going to have any breakpoints, so I'm just going to run it. And notice over here that this function for calculate area, we only wrote that line of code once. So when it starts here, it's going to ask me for my name. I'm going to put David. What is the length of the room? I'm going to put 10. What is the width of the room? I'm going to put 10. It says the area of the room is 100. I know I should probably clean this up and do my \n and probably look a little easier on the eyes, but the point is, it asked me my name. It says hello David. What is the length of the room? 10. What is the width of the room? 10. What is the area of the room? Or it says the area of the room is 100. It says, do you want to calculate another room? Please type yes or no. So I'm going to type yes. Boom. Right back into that loop. What is the length of the room? This time I'm going to do 10. What is the width of the room? I'm going to do 12. Enter. Now it says the area of the room is 120. Do I want to continue again? Yes. And then it's just going to keep looping until I say no. Because remember, keep going over here. It's that while loop. It's waiting for me to type in no. So what is the length of the room? I'm going to say 50. What is the width of the room? 50. Enter. So now the area of that room is 2,500 square feet. Do you want to continue? I'm going to type no. Program stop because I said no. So let's actually step through that here and actually get a real life example of how a while loop functions as it goes line by line, and where the actual function itself gets called. So I am going to do a breakpoint right here on line 21. Run this one last time, and I promise you this will be the last time I run it, and then we will end this video and you can get on with your life. But For those of you who are still watching, I appreciate you watching, because this is going to be the difference between those of you who just got an A in the class versus those of you who actually get hired on, and when you start day one actually knowing what it is that you're going to need to do as a software engineer. So what is my name? David. Boom. Now in the background over here, I've hit my while loop. So if I mouse over, I can see the value of keep going equals to yes. So I hit F11. Sure enough, now it actually went into this loop here because the condition was true. So it's going to ask me what is the length of the room. I'm going to type in it is 10 and I hit enter. Now I'm going to hit F11, F11. What is the width of the room? I'm going to hit 12, enter. Now if I mouse over, I can see 12. I can see all these variables coming in here. Now here's where I hit the function. So I hit F11. Notice over here it jumps to the function. It's going to execute these lines of code. It's going to return the result of 120. It returns back over here to the line it was when it jumped. But see how it says area equals 0? So as soon as I hit F11 and it goes on to the next line, now area equals 120. Console write line, it's going to tell me what that is. And now it's going to ask me, do I want to keep going? I'm going to say yes, enter. So now it goes back over here, and here's the important part of the loop. So when I hit this bottom statement on a while loop, hit F11, it jumps right back up to the top where it checks your condition. So because keep going still equaled yes, that equated to a Boolean expression that's true. So keep going equals yes. It's going to keep going through here again. Oops. I'm going to do what is the length of the room. I'm going to say this is 500. Hit F11. I'm going to keep stepping through. What is the width of the room? I'm going to say this is 23. Enter. I'm going to hit F11. Notice it jumped back over here, and I'm now in my function again. So that is literally the powerful of that's what makes function so powerful, is the fact that I can write code once but then call it from anywhere. And I know you're thinking, like, why don't I just include this in the loop and it just kind of loops over and over and over again? But what if I had like 2 different loops? Like over here I have this while loop where I'm saying, well, keep going equals yes, but like what if there was some other part of my application where I needed to calculate the area? I don't want to like write that code here, then go write it in some other loop, because remember, we as programmers are lazy and we're embracing laziness. So if we ever needed to change the way we calculated area, I don't want to go to 5 different spots in our code, or even 100 different spots in our code if it's a big application, and change the way we calculate it in 100 different places. I want to go directly to the spot in our code where we change, or where we calculate the area, and then I'm going to make that change. And that way, everywhere that anybody is calling my function, when they call it, all I have to do is change this one line of code and it will be updated everywhere. So I'm going to hit F11, F11, keep going. The result is 11,500 square feet. That returns back. It outputs that to the screen. And then it's going to ask me here, do you want to keep going? This time I'm going to hit no, and I hit enter. So now that I hit no, it goes back up here. And now if I mouse over, keep going, now has a value of no. So in this while loop, it says keep going equals yes. That actually equates to false, because keep going does not equal yes. So what I'm expecting to happen is when I hit F11, it jumps down to the bottom. And when I hit continue on this application now, that's it. Application is over. So that's that. I apologize that the video was quite long. However, this is a real world example using real code development tools, using a real code and language to show you how everything we've learned so far in the first 7 weeks of this course together matters. We've declared a variable, we've given it a name, we've given it a data type, we do length equals, and in C# it's the console.readline, but in zyBooks it's the get next input from user. The reason why zyBooks has that pseudocode is because console.readline is not what you would write if you're writing in Python or Angular or PHP. Everybody does it different. So zyBooks is kind of that universal language that we can use to learn. We've also done an actual real live while loop together. You've kind of seen that go. And then more importantly for week 7, you've seen how we're able to take a function and package it up together, give it a name, and declare that in order for other people to call this function, you have to define a variable and a data type that it will accept. And actually, to prove that this length here is not the same as this length here, I'm actually going to take this, and rather than length, I'm going to change this to 15, and I'm going to change the width to 10. And I'm going to drop a breakpoint right here, and I'm going to run this application one more time, because notice here, I'm explicitly going to pass in this time calculated area, the length, because it's the first one in this comma separated value. So the first value that I pass in is going to be the length. So the length would be 15, and this would be width. So this is what we call hard-coded, where we're not actually referencing a variable by name. Let me run that so you can see how you don't have to keep the names the same there. So I'm going to click run. I'm going to try to go through this quickly because I was doing a recap there, and now I decided to show you something new. So my name is David. What is the length of the room? Now, I hard-coded this, so no matter what I type in, I'm going to do, let's see, 99 for the length. What is the width of the room? I'm going to do 33, and I'm going to click enter. Now, if you notice, if I mouse over, there's the length, 99, and there's the width, 33. However, when I called this, I'm not passing in those variable names. So now, when I hit F11, and I'm in here, if I mouse over this length, it equals 15, and if I mouse over the width, it equals 10, because that's what I passed in. So just remember that over here, when you declare a function, you're basically saying, hey, what kind of data types do I need to accept? And then when you call it, you just kind of have to fill those slots. So if you have any questions about anything I've showed you so far, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Post a comment in the discussion threads. Like I know not everybody in the class is going to have watched this video to the end. I know our statistics show that like you won't watch a video if it's like over a minute long. However, for those of you who really needed that extra help, who would have benefited from being in an on-site classroom where we could have sat together for 4 hours and discussed this. This is kind of some of the stuff that I would have been showing to you, how zyBooks translates into the real world. So next video I make, I'll probably pick a different language. Maybe we'll do Python, and we'll do Angular, or we'll do PHP, something different. That way you can see how these concepts apply to no matter what language you pick next. So if this video was helpful, please reply back to me and let me know. I do have to take some time and set it aside to make these, and what I've noticed is if nobody watches them, then I'm going to invest my time into something else. Like maybe you just want me to call you. So let me know if this is truly something that provides value to the class, and if so, I'll keep doing them each week from here on out. So take care, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care.